what's most interesting or important for me, what's really highlighted here is just that we need to be able to have these conversations. And this kind of wraps it back to the beginning of the conversation and what we were talking about with tribalism. For anyone to want to shut people up for questioning the status quo, I believe that really hampers human progress. And this is, you know, it's so funny. I've been listening to this great series of podcasts on Joe Rogan with Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock, and they're talking about alternative archaeology. And it's the same paradigm that I see you and I in the nutrition world, in the medical world, in the weightlifting and powerlifting world. It's the establishment looking at both of us and saying, you're crazy, you're wrong. How could you even consider that? Because we're questioning the status quo. And it's so interesting. For people that are not familiar with this, I would really recommend it on Joe's podcast. Randall Carlson is a very interesting guy talking about meteoric impacts on the surface of the earth, how they might have affected climate change 10 to 12,000 years ago at what's called the Younger Dryas period. Perhaps there was a Younger Dryas meteoric impact. Joe had another guy on his podcast named Robert Schoch, who's a geologist and is involved with Egypt and Egyptian history. And he's talking about these coronal mass ejections, which are solar flares, which could have affected our climate. But no matter what, if you question the status quo in geology, archaeology, environment, or like Graham Hancock does, you know, in the anthropology or these, you know, these previous civilizations, you get vilified. People say, you're crazy. How can you do that? And they don't even want to talk to you. And that's what bugs me the most, is that we need people to question it. And maybe I'm off base and people can tell me that, but it's really good to have people thinking outside of the box. You know, Joe also had, I've been listening to a lot of Joe Rogan recently. Joe also had Eric Weinstein on recently. And Eric Weinstein said something that I thought was amazing. And Eric Weinstein is probably one of the smartest people I've ever heard speak in general. He said, we need the people who are wild. We need the people who are crazy and thinking outside of the box. We need people who are pushing the boundaries. We need those type of people because that's how we learn. And to shut it down, to say vaccines are off limits, EMF is off limits, climate is off limits. Really, like, there's a lot of nuanced conversation there. And again, just to be very clear for everyone listening, I'm not anti-vax, I'm not a climate denier, and I'm not saying that 5G is causing coronavirus. But I do think there are nuanced conversations in every single one of those things, and including the carnivore diet. The carnivore diet is just like those things. People will look at it and say, that's crazy, how can you do that? And they just dismiss it. And we need to be able to have those conversations to move it forward. We can't have this knee-jerk, and I'm not saying you and I, but I hope that people will begin to see with this coronavirus how much of a knee-jerk reaction we as a society, these tribal networks have toward anything that questions the status quo, and how limiting that is for our growth as humans.